6 and the changes that were made in Senate Commerce. And to do that, we're going to have Dylan Deere go through the bill and address the major changes. And then I believe that Charles Reimer has a cleanup amendment that he wants to discuss. Then I'll turn it over to Senator Olson to kind of walk through what his thought process was and what the committee's thought process was for the changes that they made. Then we'll have a little, the beginnings of a discussion and then come back later. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dylan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Dylan Deere. I'm a managing analyst with the Legislative Research Department. I'm going to give a brief overview of Senate sub for HB 2196. The document that you have before you that's in a landscape format. So it's going to go section by major policy. This document really focuses on the differences between the House and Senate versions of the bill. The differences will be in the long box above the top of each section, and in the red, we attempted to, in plain language, describe the various differences, where those differences occurred. There will be sections we don't cover in great detail in this document, such as the My Reemployment Plan, and that's simply because there were no major changes between the House and Senate versions. But you can always refer back to the supplemental note, which is provided to you along with the bill, which will have some descriptions of those. In addition, Charles Reimer with the revised statutes is also available to clarify any differences in the specific elements or languages of the bill. So if we look at section number 1 on Unemployment Compensation Modernization and Improvement Council, if we look at Senate differences from the House, under the Senate version, members may be removed, reappointed, or substituted at any time by their respective appointing authority. If we look at the general operations of the council, the executive secretary is appointed by the Speaker and the President. The executive secretary shall be a member of the Legislative Research Department. The Senate version specified that minutes of the council shall be public. And it also removed some of the requirements that were in the House version, such as for the executive secretary to make travel arrangements, manage phone calls, or maintain correspondence. There were some adjustments in the role of the council as well in the Senate version. There was the removal of the improvement of the user experience removed from the role of the council. There was include information on the implementation of all program integrity elements and guidance issued by the U.S. Department of Labor. There was a change from when the initial report is due from the first council meeting, made it within 30 days. I think the House version was within 90 days. There was a requirement to have a strategic plan in 9 months was removed, and that the council will report on the 15th and last day of every month on the modernization project, so basically requiring 2 reports per month on the status of the UI project. And moving on to section 2, and feel free to stop me anytime if you have any questions. And section 2 will begin on the middle of page 3. This deals with the Kansas Department of Labor Information Technology Modernization, Senate differences from the House. The deadline for the establishment of the new system will be made by the Legislative Coordinating Council. I believe there was a fixed deadline in the House version. The LCC may extend the deadline. There are specific elements such as integrated tax features and automated work opportunity tax credit eligibility was removed from the bill. The council shall determine the system components as advised by the Secretary of Labor. And there was a bunch of different elements that were sort of summarizing that. There was a lot of very specific detail, and there was a little bit more just oversight responsibilities given to the council in the Senate version. Program integrity elements implemented on a time frame specified by the council, and all system integrity components shall be implemented within 60 days if the council were to become inactive or dissolved. Moving to page 4, sections 4 through 7. UI Trust Fund data reporting, Senate differences from the House. Data would be certified by the Department of Labor, so it's just requiring a certification. On item number 2, the first publication within 120 days of the publication of the act. I think the House was 90. And then data published annually on or before December 1st. I think there was data publications based around fiscal years in the House version. Moving to page 5. That was the My Reemployment Plan. If you review, and I'll defer to Charles on this, but if you review the language, you will see differences, but I think as a policy matter, the 2 sections are very similar, but Charles maybe correct me on that. On new section 6 on federal coronavirus relief aid and SGF transfers, Number 1 clarifies that all transfers must be in compliance with federal requirements. 2, it eliminates backup transfers from the state general fund in case the federal coronavirus relief funds were not available, or if the full $450 million is not available in federal funds. And 3, provides up to $500 million transfer that may be made as an immediate transfer of $250 million when federal funds become available, and a second payment of up to $250 million may be made upon the completion of the LPA audit. Moving to page 6, yes. Work refusal provisions and benefits disqualification for fraudulent or misleading statements. Senate differences from the House. 10 business day period was clarified that was business days and not just 10 calendar days. The benefits disqualification changed to 1 year upon repayment of all overpayments, interest, penalties, and fees for the first offense, and 5 years upon repayment of the all overpayments, interest, penalties, and fees for each subsequent offense. I believe that the House version was lifetime suspension for the second offense. On number 3, created a felony charge for individuals who make false or misleading statements to obtain benefits who meet a variety of criteria, and clarifies that individuals who are victims of identity theft are not liable for fraudulent UI claims made using their stolen identities. And turning to page 8, or the last page, Section 10 had to do with the unemployment rate thresholds for maximum benefits and DCF verification. And in the Senate difference from the House, it just moved that date to September 5th from April 1st. And there's some additional information on fiscal information, but the main difference really between the two bills is the SGF transfers as a support, and the timing of some of the transfers to the UI trust fund, and also the 500 versus 450. With that, I would stand for questions.
Would anyone on the committee have questions on the differences in the bills?
Good sum up. Just the only difference is we put 30 days. You had 90 to set up the council on page 3. Just make sure you see that at the top of page 3.
On our side, do you have any questions for Dylan? It's okay, seeing none. Charles, you want to chime in with the suggested technical cleanup?
Thank you, Chairman. Members of the conference committee, I've handed out a balloon that just has a handful of technical changes, primarily to just the first couple of sections of the bill dealing with the establishment of the new council, primarily. So if you turn to page 2 of the balloon, we're just changing other to non-legislative, just a clarification. The change on the bottom of page 2 is a little bit more substance to it. If you turn to page 6 of the balloon, in the middle of the page, lines 22 and 23, you'll see there that the language is that the council may suggest rules and regulations for adoption by the secretary as necessary to implement the provisions of this section. At one point, the council had been given rule and regulation authority. That was removed, and that's actually in both versions of the bill, the language that I just read. That had been removed, and unfortunately, the reference to rules and regulations on the bottom of page 2 was not removed. So on the bottom of page 2, that reference to rules and regulations pertains to how the council members are to receive compensation, how that's to be determined, travel and other necessary expenses. If you look at subsection D on the bottom of page 2, that determination of the compensation, expenses, travel, other necessary expenses is to be made in accordance with the rules and regulations adopted by the council. I would suggest that that be changed to policies to be consistent with the removal of rule and reg authority. There would be other options as well, of course, but I would suggest one way to just fix that would be just to change it to policies. On page 3, we just have a change in wording. It should be read council, not committee. Finally, on the last page of the balloon, this is a provision that is in the Senate version of the bill. This is actually, if you look at the bold text, that was an amendment that was made on the Senate floor to, instead of one tranche of $450 million, to split it into two tranches of $250 million that goes into the unemployment insurance fund. And that language in bold there, there's a reference at the end on the top of page 13 that discusses where monies go if in fact there's money left over from that second tranche of $250 million, where that's supposed to go, if not to replace fraudulent payments in the UA Employment Security Fund. So currently, the language you see there on the top of page 13 is it shall be allocated to the state general fund. That has potentially, as I understand it from legislative research at Dylan and also our appropriation folks, potentially an issue with, because there may be restrictions on the federal money, and putting it back into state general fund may run afoul of those federal provisions or restrictions with respect to that federal coronavirus aid money. So a suggested fix for that is just to provide that it goes to any special revenue fund or funds established for coronavirus relief. I'd note that the language in accordance with appropriation acts is there. So where it goes is subject to the legislature, and in the absence of the legislature being in session, it would be the LCC.
Okay. Any questions on the cleanup language?
No, it looks pretty needed to me. You know, and as I go through the bill, I'll tell you, like the last piece, how it got to the general fund. And
Yeah.
it's kind of work in progress.
We went through those same issues when we were trying to develop the initial 450, so I totally understand it. I think we get it. We're not seeing an issue with this right off the bat.
Okay, you want me to go through it?
Yeah, the floor is yours, Senator.
Sure, thank you. You know, on the first piece, we just wanted to be able to reappoint a member if there was a reason they couldn't make it. And so that's the first page. That's kind of what we did, was clean that up. Case, you know, as we know, members of the legislature, whoever, sometimes can't make a meeting, and just wanted to make sure there was public minutes. On page 2, we wanted to reduce that to 30 days, and we might even refine that a little more, as that's one of the issues I'd like to talk about. The second paragraph, Labor Department really asked me, they just didn't want to.
Sorry, I'm not seeing on page 2 the 30. I'm
sorry.
not seeing the 30 days on page 2.
It's on page 3, I'm sorry, I'm old-fashioned, 1 and then 3, no. 30 at the top. And then the Labor Department, you know, they wanted to do some set reports, but they didn't want to be called in every day to a different committee, and you know, they wanted to focus their time on what they were doing. So that's why we set it up on the 15th and the 30th. Also on page 4, let me see here. We wanted to establish where we could extend the council, and that's why we, you know, we started out, one minute we were going to do the council, and then in committee, when we offered the amendment, they, well, actually, then we went to the State Finance Council, back in committee, they went back to the council, and then after talking with the reviser, we'd need more legislators on there. So then the decision was to go back to the LCC, which probably the most appropriate place for it. On page 5, the parties negotiated. You had 450, we increased it to 500 million, and we did it in 2 payments for a simple reason. The money's coming from the COVID relief in two different troughs of 800 million or around that. So this would allow the first 250 to go in when they first get it, and the second batch is not expected to be here until about a year later. And then that would go into an earmarked account marked for to replenish after the audit comes in, which the audit's due September 1st, I believe. So we'll probably have the audit before the money even gets into the account. We'll know how much was lost and then be able to replenish that. And then the amendment he was talking about, you know, the remainder would go back if we adopt the amendment or if we want to do something else to send if there's a remaining amount of money. Also, in page 6, probably the other big adjustment, we added a year on to 23 that would freeze the rates for all businesses. They wouldn't have their quarterlies go up. They'd be frozen until year 23. We just wanted to clarify the 10 business days. And so, you know, to make it, you know, kind of where everybody knows. Then again, on the penalty for fraud, we looked over a lot of other states. Most of them had 1 year. The way the bill reads, the clock starts ticking after the fraud money's been paid back with penalties and interest, then the clock will start ticking. And it's the same way for 5 years. And they'll still be, my understanding under federal law, they'll still be assessed their penalty too once they start receiving that money. And then my vice chair put on this amendment dealing with a fraud, making it a misdemeanor. We're probably going to want to look, he wrote it pretty quick and made it a level 2. We're probably going to want to make that about a level 5. That might be a tweak that we're going to want to do. And also, my understanding, the amendment doesn't, he was really going after the bad actors out of state, out of the country, really. And, but we probably want to make sure that pertains to Kansans too. I know Senator Francisco on our side, you know, asked me if we could do something on the floor, and I said, we'll do it in conference. We also heard from the union groups about the fraudulent victims of identity theft. So we wanted to make sure and put that in there from different business groups that we didn't punish them. So we put that in. And then the date to enact the reduction of the payment weeks. The Labor Department told us most of the programs in September 1st. And, you know, it'd be a lot of work to take it down on April 1st. So they convinced us that September 5th would be an appropriate time. The only thing that would really be left would be the federal programs. And so we went with that. Let's see. And then the last piece is just, it's talking about the 500 million after the legislative post audit. So I don't know if you have any questions, but you guys did a really nice job. I mean, this bill's big and heavy, and I can tell you, we met on the Senate version, House version, a couple different weeks, but we know you guys put in months on this, and we appreciate the heavy lift that you guys did. It's really a good piece of legislation. I mean, we tweaked it, and you know, as you know, probably one of the biggest bills. I've done a few of them over the years, but it's one of the biggest bills I've seen. So I mean, pretty minor tweaks, really.
Yes, sir. Thank you for all your all your work on this bill. I know we sent you a completely imperfect bill, but it had the framework anyway that was necessary. And so most of these items that you changed, I think are really good changes and needed to be done. There are a few that I had some questions on to start with, if you wouldn't mind. And committee, do you guys have any questions for the senator at this point? Okay, seeing none. Let's see. My first question's on page 3. You said you removed the no later than 9 months after the first meeting of council. Was that too long, too short? What was the reasoning behind that? When it seemed like an adequate amount of time.
That's one I'm going to have to step back, and I can't remember why we did that. I'll have to get back with you at our next meeting on that, okay?
Okay. You also said at the top of page 3, 30 days to the first meeting, 90 days. We had 90 days. I agree that it should be at least 30. It probably should be shorter, especially in light of the RFP that went out. We need to get on top of that and address that so that we can have some input there. And so we would be open to whatever suggestion you may have on that.
I concur. I mean, they put the RFP out on the street. I didn't know it was going to happen, and that changes several things here. We dropped it to 30, but I'm thinking maybe even 14, and them are calendar days, so we'd probably want it to read. I don't know if you have a suggestion. I don't know, because this time this goes into effect, I mean, we could even do it sooner if you would want, but I have 14 right now, and because it's going to take a few days time. We run the report. It's got to be put in a register. I don't know how many, Chuck. How many weeks does it have to be printed in the register? 2 or so, and it still has to go to the governor, and so we're talking just going to effect maybe close to a month.
Yeah, it could even take longer. They could be under contract with a new provider by the time this goes into law.
I think they got some challenges to do that. I don't know. All the money's coming through the appropriation process, so I think they'd probably want to make sure they got the money before they do it.
Right. Okay, so I don't think there's going to be a problem with 14 days, but I want to meet with my team first to make sure that's okay. Sure. And it does say within 14 days or 30 days, and so if we could act quicker, we will.
Yeah.
Let's go to page 4. I know you had an amendment in committee that changed the date and had the governor be able to choose the date. Then you had another amendment that left it up to the LCC with input from the council, or from up to the council, because the council had their finger on the pulse, and that went on in committee. Then on the floor, you made a change. Is there a reason that you took out, none of the amendments that were brought in committee took out the December 31st, 2024 or 2022, but the one on the floor did? If you're going to leave it up to the LCC to extend a deadline at any time, why would you not want to leave the goal of December 31st, 2022 in there as something to shoot for?
The amendment in committee was a conceptual amendment by my ranking on the committee, and Senator Tyson pulled the date out. And then we had it set up because we offered it as a big balloon where it was going to go to the State Finance Council. So they made a motion to pull that out and then to let the Modernization Council make the decision on extending it. So I figured I'd leave the committee's will of taking the date out. I I do know, it wasn't my amendment, so, I mean, that's something we can discuss, putting the date back in. But, you know, my committee did that, and I was honoring their wishes there. You know, my initial thing is I want some oversight, because once we hit that date, if we can't achieve it or we're halfway in the process, I don't want it to stop. I want someone with some authority there that can approve it to the finish. I don't want to have to come back to the legislature to get more time.
Right. I agree with you, and I think we spoke about that on the day that you were doing those amendments in committee. I would like to see the date back in there just as a goal, especially being that it could be changed, and I would like the LCC at least to have input from the committee that has their finger on the pulse of the program.
What was the date again?
It was December 31st, 2022.
Mr. Chairman, can I comment on that?
Hang
Senator
on.
Holland?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, yeah, for better or for worse, I was the actor that made the motion to pull the date. My concern is this, and for just background, my professional background is in IT project management. I'm a certified PMP project manager. I'm a co-owner of a federal contracting firm, and I have participated in several and have managed several system development and migration efforts. My own personal bias and opinion is that the committee and this legislation is actually a couple thoughts. Number one, the council is in no way in a position yet to establish some sort of a delivery date, particularly having not even discussed with the Department of Labor what their methodology is, what their approach is for letting the RFP. You know, I assume they're going to be looking for existing systems platforms, probably currently in operation, where we could more easily migrate to an existing structure versus doing, I assume we're not doing any major custom software development on this at all. And I just felt, number one, until the council rolled up his sleeves and worked with the department to figure out what the methodology and the major milestones of the project are going to be, they're in no position to set that up, because I think they're setting themselves up for failure. My second concern with that is establishing a date in the legislation itself. Is I think from an IT contractual standpoint, you're probably going to start compromising the state's negotiating position, the RFP, if you have a hard delivery date already specified in legislation. That could translate into additional dollars being paid to the contractor, because there will be additional risk on their part. If in fact the state does enter into an agreement with the contractor cannot make that date, then you have a whole raft of issues as far as what is the mitigation for changing that date and the impact on the project schedule and the financial payments to the prime contractor. So that is why I felt very strongly about keeping that date out initially until the council could meet with, once again, the department, establish methodology and milestones, and then begin to put some flesh on that bone, as it were. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I recall Senator Tyson has some expertise in this field, and she followed up with similar, saying that date's too quick. I mean, although they're moving quick now in this RFP. You know, that's one of the reasons why it was pulled out. And then in my amendment, I left it out. I didn't put it back in. As I've met with different people, it's not a priority, but really, when I met with the different groups, they just wanted to make sure to have some kind of mechanism, if nothing else, that can extend it and will be reasonable to extend it through the process. And that's always been my mission, so.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, I think that between your ranking and Senator Tyson, they could probably write this program and have it done by December 31st, 2022. So we'll move on. Top of page 5, just had a question on 120 days versus 90 days. Was that just not enough timeline, or did you get
believe-
input from the DOL on that?
Yeah, Department of Labor, that's a amendment that the groups made, the Business Department of Labor made when we were meeting. They needed a little more time.
On the new section 6, on number 3, line number 3 in the top box there, you've got 500 million going in, 250 at first, and then another 250 on completion of the LPA audit. Did you mean to say the audit that is being done by an outside firm that's chosen by the council, or the?
It was your September 1st audit that's supposed to report back. I don't know how it's written in the bill. I'd have to look at the bill. I'll look at it when we're on break. But my understanding, first, the money's got to be there, so we got to wait until the second batch is there. And then that money, after the audit comes back, that money would, up to 250 million would be set in there, plus interest, would be ready to go right in. My understanding, I don't know what the count's at today, but when we were doing this, the Labor Department was about 270 million with, we had a quarter ending and a lot of money was coming in. And, some of the things they did for fraud kind of tapered off the spending and what was going out. And and that first 250 would be there, so we felt with doing the September 5th date, the benefits would be dropping off at that point, that the fund would be stable and well on its way to be going back the other direction. And then, what is found up to that other 250 would be put in when we get it.
Okay, so in regards to the question of the LPA audit, I think we want to make that the audit that's done by the outside firm, not the LPA audit, because I believe that'll be more thorough, and that's the one that's due on September 1st. So I just figured that was lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, that's what we were shooting at, was the September 1st audit, and I'm sure Chuck can make that tweak, right?
In regards to the 450 million versus 500 million in two payments, as I have, you've been here much longer than I have, but in my few short years, I've noticed that when we put money aside in the future, it almost never happens. And so the way this is written, we'll get 250 million. The other 250 million may or may not come. And more times than not around here, that 250 million will be used for another use.
Well, it won't be if I'm still here. I mean, I'm gonna make sure that 250 goes in there. And I mean, I think statutorily, we'll have Chuck will have to write it, or we have our hands on that 250 first.
The only way to have our hands completely around that money is to put it in the fund, because we cannot take it out of that fund other than to pay claims.
I think the challenge is, once you put money in the fund, you can't get it out. And if there's an overage, then, you're putting money in that's,
Well, most of the other prudent states have already put a lot of money into their trust funds out of the CARES Act dollars without regards to repaying fraudulent claims or mispayments. And so if the 450 wasn't enough, first of all, we believe that the way this trust fund was run, that $450 million will be completely inadequate by the time the audit comes back. And I do have some numbers that I'll review with you when the time is appropriate as far as how we came up with those numbers, but we think it'll be between 650 and 925 million dollars that will have paid out in fraud.
that's all state.
That's state dollars based on what was paid out.
I would probably like to look at them numbers and not,
We can do that at an appropriate time.
okay?
Another thing that was removed from this bill is the improper payments.
On page what? 6?
Well, I think it's on page 5 and 6, really.
Okay, yeah.
Currently, we had, the bill was to hold harmless for improper payments that were made by the state and fraudulent payments that were made by the state for the employment trust fund. And with your amendment in committee, you removed the improper payments. And I was wondering if that was also an oversight or if there was a purpose behind taking out improper payments.
I think that might have been an oversight. I think the two groups worked together to try to come to some resolution. I think that might have got taken out. Because, I mean, we want to make the businesses whole, and that's always been our mission. And if they were improper, you know, then I think we'll definitely look at putting that back in.
Okay, good. The reason I asked is our current rate is 14.5%, and over the last year, that's $160 million that was paid out improperly. And later in the bill, on page 64, line 10, we are holding everyone harmless for those funds that were paid out of our trust fund, and that includes the reimbursing employers. And I'm not quite sure if everybody knows how that works, but some of our schools, for example, are reimbursing employers where if there's a claim made, we're making that payment on their behalf out of our business trust fund, and then the schools or the reimbursing employer will reimburse us for those claims. And on page 64, line 10, we are holding them harmless for all those dollars. And so if the intent was to get rid of improper payments, then we've got to do something on page 64 as well, so the businesses aren't shouldering all of that.
We'll take a look at putting that back in. Let me study that just a tad.
That's fine.
You know, we want to make the businesses whole. How do you arrive at that number? Is the audit going to have that?
The audit will be on for fraudulent payments and improper payments, and then we'll know that by September of 2022.
Okay.
Which brings me to my next issue. In the bill that we sent you, at the end of 2022, after the audit was in, we had kind of a squaring up of the trust fund. Whereas the $450 million, we didn't anticipate that being enough when you include improper payments and fraud. And at the end of 2022, we were going to shore up the fund by saying if the audit shows more than $450 million, that money would be owed to the trust fund at some point. And we put a mechanism in there to pay it back over 5 years in 5 equal payments so that we didn't put the state general fund at jeopardy. Was that something that you removed purposely, or could that have been removed with this other stuff?
And I think the parties, when they were negotiating, pulled it out. I'll get an answer on that.
Okay. You mentioned on the fraud stuff. So the 2 years, when it came out of committee, we left it at 5 years as the penalty in fraud. Vic Miller had an amendment in committee that didn't go on, but we negotiated with him, and that's how we came up with the 2 years for the first occurrence and disqualification for a lifetime on the second occurrence. The changes you made, I think, are acceptable. And you mentioned on the bottom half there, as far as the bill would establish the crime as a level 2, that you might want to go to a level 5. We'd be willing to talk about that. But if you look at the amount of fraud that we've experienced and the number of claims, some of these claims were in the range of $25,000 apiece. And so this would send a good signal. I like that amendment a lot. Would send a good signal that we're not messing around in Kansas, and maybe they'll target other states.
Yeah, on the fraud, what we tried to do was look at other states, and the 2 years kind of left it open end. they could, in 2 years, the clock starts ticking the day it's deemed fraud. So, in 2 years, they could start drawing benefits and using their own benefits to pay back the money that they've taken fraudulently. So we didn't really like that provision because of, we didn't have that details on when the clock start. So we thought 1 year would give someone that made a mistake, an opportunity to fix it, pay it back, interest and all that, and then the clock starts. And hopefully they learn their lesson, but then again, if they didn't, they would have, the feds, my understanding, to stay in compliant, we have to have a remedy or they'd be able to go to court and get that judgment in court to fix that. So, putting the 5 years in, I mean, that's what we currently have. That would be the second offense, so I think we made it better than it was before. And I don't know, I like ours because it just spells out the clock. The level 2, I think the time they would serve would be, I don't know, a lot of time, let's put it that way, over 15 years.
Say it would be a
Level
deterrent.
2. Yeah, it definitely would, but I think it's probably a level 5, my understanding, for financial crime, even at a much larger, is about as stiff as you can really do. So, and I didn't want to go too strong and be out of compliance with the other regular financial crimes and have a judge overturn a case, and then we have to fix it. And, so I think, I'll let you think about that change. I mean, we did that amendment on the fly. My vice chair, he was going to offer it in committee, and then he was busy testifying on other bills, and it didn't get offered, but I told him we'd help him on the floor, and he got it on, and so we'd like to add, I don't know, it's people out of state and foreign actors. We'd like to go ahead and make that compliant with just everybody, so that's our thoughts there.
Well, personally, I view those two changes as positive. I would like to run that by Senator Representative Miller.
Sure.
Because we did have an agreement with him. I would say, not to speak for him, I would say that this is still better than the 5 years, and he probably would be open to it. But I do want to make sure that he's okay with that before I speak for him. Okay, and then I guess for now, the final part would be the unemployment thresholds. I don't know how we put April 1st in there. I think that was meant to be 21st because I believe our current changes that we made before we left for the COVID break last year had the 26 weeks sunsetting on April 21st, I believe. That's how the current law reads from what I understand. And it doesn't really get rid of the 26 weeks. It just puts it back to the sliding scale that was there beforehand. If you recall, we made that change, seeing this coming to make sure that everybody got 26 weeks because we knew it would get over the 6% pretty quick. But that being said, our current rate is 3.2% unemployment. There are 9,000 people collecting unemployment in Kansas right now. Kansas Works has 42,000 jobs posted, and there's another job board in Kansas that has 54,000 jobs posted. And so with us looking at this, trying to protect these unemployment trust funds for the businesses that paid them in, allowing somebody 26 weeks when there's that many jobs available, I would think they'd be able to get a job much quicker. We are at full employment according to 3.2% unemployment. So I would like to, instead of September 5th and April 1st, just let the current law that's in place stand, and when that sunsets, it sunsets.
Well, and I don't think we can do April 1st because time this bill goes into effect.
Right.
If we passed it today, it'd be 30 days. and we're already past that. But our reasoning to do it, this was negotiated by the parties. It was, the Labor Department said it would be easier, it'd be more in line. These people would have exhausted their state benefits. They would only be on federal benefits from that time forward if they have any.
Yeah, this clause only applies to our state benefits. The federal benefits are completely separate. And if I recall correctly, we had a sliding scale all along, and so the system is set up for that. They just type in 3.2%, and people get the 14 weeks.
Yeah, my understanding is they would have to stop these benefits. They'd have to go in manually and take every one of these out because they're still going to be qualified to draw the federal. And so they're already drawing the state and the federal, so they'd have to manually go take the time to take these out, and that would take away from getting some of the backlog done. So that's
Right, so
my
I
thinking.
guess I understand that reasoning, but the system is set up for a sliding scale. This does only pertain to the state side of it. We're trying to protect these funds because we have $261 million today. We're paying out 4-point-some million a week. And we're towards the end of the first quarter. We're not going to receive a whole lot more funds for the rest of the year. And the goal is to protect these. I know we're going to possibly put in $250 or $450 million more, but if we get, as we creep up on a possible recession, we could be to zero pretty darn fast.
Oh, I think they're going to keep the printing presses.
Yeah, right. So that's just something to think about and chew on for now. Those were my biggest concerns with this, and it sounds to me like some of this stuff, like we're really close on most of it, and some of it might have just been an oversight with all the people negotiating things and the way the amendments got drafted. And that was my hope anyway, and it sounds like that was
I think we're
probably
really
what happened with
close.
most of this.
I really think we're really close. When you have a bill that's this complicated, you always kind of just go back and forth the last couple times. But we're really close. I think maybe meet later this afternoon. I can give you some detail on some of that clarity and go from there.
Can you hang on just a second?
Remember, your vice chair.
Representative Long.
I had a question on, we're getting back to the second $250 million payment. So it'd be on page 5, section 6, number 3. Second payment of $250 million would be made upon completion of the audit. That's assuming the audit shows a $500 million fraud, right? To
Well,
get the full 250? It's
to
not.
get the full 250, you'd have to have 500 million
Right.
fraud, yeah.
And that line, it implies that, but it doesn't stipulate that.
Yeah, I haven't read that part in the bill, but I'm guessing the
So
bill.
really I'm sorry, my question really was for Chuck on that probably. Does that need to be stipulated that audit needs to come back showing fraud of 500 million before this second 250 kicks in, Chuck?
I think he addressed that, Representative, in the amendment that he brought forward as far as if it was if it was under the 250 additional dollars, whatever was left over out of the 250 would go to another COVID fund.
Right, I was just talking about getting the max though.
Okay, Charles?
I'm sorry, I lost your question in listening to the response.
This amendment states to get the second $250 million payment, it's assumed that the audit that came in would have to show a loss of $500 million or more to get that second $250 million payment. And that's assumed the audit would show that, but it's not stipulated.
I'm not sure that that really is the case.
Okay.
In looking at the language, and I'll have to read this again more closely, but, you know, there is a determination made by the audit, as written, the LPA audit, about the amount, and then the certification, and then the aggregate amount of that certification is to be transferred.
I'm just trying
So-
to determine under what circumstances does that second 250 kick in?
Here's how I see it working. Now, we're going to change that to the outside audit that's going to come back
Right.
September 1st. So as that money comes in, it'll be designated to an earmarked account that the interest will go in that cannot be touched, only for the purpose of once that audit comes back. So say that audit comes back and it says it's 350 million, then $100 million of that money that's left over, because you already put the first 250 in, will go in. And if the audit says 500 million, then all of it will go in. You know, so that's how I see that mechanism working. I don't know if that explains it a little more.
That's how I see it working too, Senator, but it's not stipulated. It's assumed.
Did you look at the bill? Or
Well,
the bill's probably, I'll check the bill out.
We can review that. We can review that for the later meeting today, and we're due back on the floor. Representative Clayton, did you have anything to add? I can't see you back there, so.
No, I did not. If I did have something to add, trust me.
I know. Yeah, I know, yeah. I think he's asleep.
Senator Holland, did you have anything?
So we're due back on the floor at, was it 3:30?
I think my vice chair had an amendment to run.
He seems to be busy. All right. So if you could think over kind of the few questions that we still have, and we'll reconvene at 4 o'clock. You want to do 4 o'clock or upon adjournment of the House?
You know, you call it and I'll be there. I'd always say 4:30.
Okay.
And then, you know, I'll be here as long as we need tonight. And, so then we can come and meet, wrap this up.
Okay, that sounds good. We'll see you in here at 4:30. If for some reason someone else has this room booked, we'll let you know and we'll make that announcement. Thank you. Thanks again, Senator. Thanks, guys, for coming. We're adjourned.